Alright, so we are moving on in Gravity's Rainbow here to, in this video we'll do episodes 6, 7, and 8, because they're all relatively short. 7's a little long, but, and we're approaching the exact midpoint of the book, which is page 387. And here, episode 6 begins on 365. Now, as the episode opens up, we're back with Slothrop, and he's in Berlin now. And as he's come down from the balloon, now he's got a new avatar as Rocket Man, a sort of comic book character avatar that he has the idea for in his head. But it doesn't happen yet until he encounters a group of underworld types who are sitting around smoking pot later in the chapter. But at first here, it seems like there might be, once again on The Wizard of Oz, there might be an oblique reference here to Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, whereas the Tin Man wants a heart and the Scarecrow wants a brain and the Lion wants courage. Dorothy just wants to go home. And so in a sense, Slothrop is in the role of Dorothy here, where it says, wondering if I'll ever see Berkshire again. Mommy, Mommy, the war's over. Why can't I go home now? So there's an echo of Dorothy's role with Slothrop here. He gets sick. He's made the mistake of drinking water out of the tear garden, and he's sick with diarrhea for a while. And then he meets up with Enzian and the Schwarzkommando. And he has a conversation with them, and he notices that they have a little badge, a little round circle that's in red, white, and blue that has 4 letters on the periphery: K, going clockwise, E, Z, V, and then in the center is H. And Weisenberger points out what these letters stand for, and they stand for the 5 phases of the launch of a rocket. Klar is the first phase, meaning clear, which indicates that all hoses and cables have been disconnected from the rocket. And then the E is Entluftung, or ventilation, which means that the first flow of alcohol and liquid oxygen had been released into the combustion chamber. And then Zündung, or ignition, was their call when the mixture was ignited by a spark plug, followed by Vorstufe, or first stage, which meant that the flow of auxiliary fuels, hydrogen peroxide and calcium permanganate, had begun driving the turbopumps to increase the flows of alcohol and oxygen, and Hauptstufe, or main stage, when the rocket starts to lift off the platform. This should be compared, of course, with Sadi Carnot's 4-stroke cycle for sort of his metaphysical diagram of the ideal internal combustion engine, in which it's 4 strokes, and the first stroke is intake, and then the second stroke is ignition. In that case, the spark plug ignites the fuel mixture inside the cylinder, and then downstroke is the 3rd stage, when the explosion pushes the cylinder downward, and then the 4th phase is the exhaust. And so that's Carnot's idea of the metaphysical sort of diagram of the ideal internal combustion engine. So it should be contrasted with these 5 different stages of the ignition of the rocket and its launching. So then he comes up to Enzian and they start talking a bit. Enzian, he notices that, so Major Marvey didn't find you guys. You guys are still assembled. They're wearing bits and pieces of Wehrmacht uniform. They kind of look very bedraggled, sort of ragtag group now. And he's talking to Enzian and who mentions the Schwarzgerät and the Schwarzkommando, and he says, Scuffling, suppose there were an alphabetical list. Someone's list alphabetically, an input to some intelligence arm, say, some country, it doesn't matter. But suppose that on this list the 2 names Black Instrument, or Schwarzgerät, Black Command, Schwarzkommando, just happen to be there juxtaposed. That's all, an alphabetical coincidence. We wouldn't have to be real, and neither would it, correct? So he puts a doubt in Slothrop's mind that maybe he just accidentally stumbled upon these 2 terms in the documents that he was looking at, Schwarzgerät, Schwarzkommando. Maybe it's an accident. Maybe they don't really exist. And so this gets back once again to Pynchon's idea of causality, the issue of causality. Are things real or are they not? That's always an issue with Pynchon. We never know for sure. So he's talking to him, and then that's it for that. And then we get the first mention of Greta Erdmann, who is a woman that's mentioned here just as with Chicharine in the first chapter of part 3, who was mentioned by Gelly Tripping, but we don't see him. We didn't see him yet. Here we don't see Greta for a while, for a couple chapters yet. But Greta Erdmann, and notice that she's named after Marguerite Gretchen in Faust, the girl that Faust seduces. He gets Mephistopheles to help him seduce, has sex with her, fathers a child on her, then abandons her. And then, so the child is born in this town out of wedlock, and then she puts it to death, and then they put her in jail and sentence her to death. And at the end of Faust Part 1, Faust is going in there trying to get her to leave her jail, and she won't do it because she believes she deserves death. So note that. All these references to Faust, there's quite a few of them in this book. So Greta Erdmann, and it turns out that Greta Erdmann now is a silent film star, and they're near the town of Neubabelsberg, which is the center of the German film industry, UFA and so forth, in the 1920s. And she has been in films directed by Gerhard von Goll, whom is a fictional director that Pynchon has made up, whom we have seen that the White Visitation hired to make a fake film about the Schwarzkommando. But it turns out he had made a movie called Albdrucken, Nightmare, with Greta in it, having a gangbang. So it was a pornographic film, and in that gangbang, somebody fathered on her daughter Bianca Erdmann. Slothrop has sex with both of these women, naturally, at one point or another. And she doesn't know who the father is, but her husband currently is a guy named Miklos Thanats. So he's named after Thanatos, the word for death. But we will meet up with that later. Pynchon always gives you a heads up. Before characters show up, before events show up, he's always foreshadowing them. And then he comes across, he smells marijuana. So he's wandering around in these ruins in Berlin. He smells marijuana. He's like, oh, I want some of that. So he walks to this area where there's a very large tree, almost like the world tree, once again, Yggdrasil. And a guy sitting there, Emil Zoira is his name. Zoira means acid. And he's an underworld type who basically is a drug dealer. And two girls are sitting with him, Magda and another girl whose name I've forgotten. And Slothrop goes, hey, can I have a toke off that? So he sits down with them. They start getting stoned. And he's looking at them, and they have just raided Wagnerian opera, all the costumes. So there are all these costumes in various bits of disarray. There's a helmet with Viking horns on it, and some capes and so forth. So Slothrop sits down with them. He's eyeballing these costumes. They get stoned. And then, oddly enough, or synchronicitously enough, let's say, Emil Zoira says, he points at Slothrop and he says, Rocket Man, Raketenmensch. And Slothrop is like, now I had this idea in my head. What a weird thing that while we're stoned, this guy would mention this. And he picks up the Viking helmet, breaks off the horns, and puts it on Slothrop's head. He says, there, it looks perfectly like the nose cone of a rocket. You're a rocket man. And they dig out a cape from the costumes, and they put a cape on him. So anyway, it's Pynchon's archaeology of American pop culture coming out of the ruins here of European highbrow culture, Wagnerian culture. That whole world of what Carl Schmitt called the Jus Publicum Europaeum is in total ruins here at the end of this war. With the disintegration of all these nation states, we're going to see the Potsdam Conference next, where they carved up Germany by the three powers, Russia and England and America. And it's just in ruins. And American pop, superheroes are coming into being in the 1930s. We have superheroes in the Sunday Funnies as comic strips from as early as 1929, where the first two, I believe, were Tarzan and Flash Gordon, and then the Phantom shortly after that. Then we get Superman in Action Comics in 1938, and then Batman the following year in Detective Comics number 27 in 1939. Then Marvel Comics in that same year puts out their very first issue, Marvel Comics number 1, in which they introduced the Human Torch and the Submariner as well, who will engage in fighting. So the superhero mythos is up and running by this point, by 1945. And of course, Slothrop has been reading Plastic Man comics for his edification, as we have seen. So he's like, oh yeah, that's cool. So they put the cape on him, and now he's Rocket Man. So that's his new avatar. He's no longer Ian Scuffling, the British war correspondent. Now he's a comic book character, Rocket Man. And so they're sitting around, and then Who shows up now but Pig Bodine from V? Recall V? If you watch my V videos, you remember vividly, I'm sure, Pig Bodine here, who is referred to as Seaman Bodine. This would be about 10 years earlier than V was set in 1955, I believe. And he's sitting there singing a song when Slothrop meets him. He's been stationed on a ship called the John E. Badass. So Slothrop and Bodine meet here, and Bodine says, hey, you know what? I know where I've got a shipment of hashish stored, but it's in Potsdam where the conference is going on. You would have to get in there and get it for me. After all, you're Rocket Man. And Emil Zoro chimes in, yeah, this is only something that an American superhero could do. You're Rocket Man, right? You can get in there. And Slothrop is like, not sure about that. But Bodine says, I'll give you a kilo of that hash. And Slothrop says, where do I sign up? Pretty much. And so he agrees to go in. And then so we get episode 7, which is set on July 18th, 1945. Now the Potsdam Conference began the day before, on July 17th, and it was held to August 2nd. On July 16th, the atom bomb was tested out here where I'm at in New Mexico at White Sands. It was called the Trinity Test, and it was tested on July 16th for the first time. And Harry S. Truman received word that it worked. So now he goes into this conference extremely puffed up. He was an arrogant prick, Harry Truman was, extremely puffed up, thinking he's going to run the show and rule the world now because America has the doomsday weapon, as Kubrick refers to it ironically in Dr. Strangelove. And so he goes in, and the Potsdam Conference is held. Stalin is there, Churchill is there, and Truman. FDR had died just before VE Day. And Slothrop, it turns out, didn't know that. He just finds that out. FDR, it turns out, was one of his heroes. And so the point of the conference is to figure out how, between these three powers, they're going to carve up Germany into West Berlin and East Berlin, how they're going to try the Germans for war crimes at Nuremberg. Remember, as Carl Schmitt said, war was made illegal for the first time in Western history at the end of World War I, when Kaiser Wilhelm was the first ever to be tried for war crimes. Prior to that, during the entire epoch, from about the 17th century down to World War I, the JPE, as he terms it, the Jus Publicum Europaeum, war was legal. There was no such thing as war crimes there. Any nation state could legally declare war on the other. Not so starting with World War I and the disintegration of the JPE here. All of this is the disintegration of 4 or 5 centuries of European history that went on in this mega war here. These two wars, which are really only one war, actually, one mega war. And so once Truman learned about the atom bomb, now as they come out of the conference, he's like, the Japanese must surrender, and they're not surrendering. So they give him a couple of days, and then on August 6th, they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. They waited 3 more days, and then on August 9th, when they still didn't surrender, they dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki. But as Oliver Stone points out in his Untold History of the United States, he's pretty sure that the Japanese, it was totally superfluous. The Japanese were going to surrender. They were just trying to do so in a graceful way where they wouldn't have to lose face. So they were trying to plan that out. The second bomb, no matter how you look at it, was totally egregiously over the top. It was as shameful as the fire bombings of the German cities and the concentration camps with the Nazis. Total shame here going on both sides in this conflict. And Truman, I think of him as a kind of a ninny, one of these kids who probably was picked on in school and trying to prove himself with the atom bomb. Look what we have, like the British firebombing Hamburg. Oh, you have to pay attention to us. Look how powerful we are. A lot of ego went on in this war. A lot of ego on both sides. Pretty shameful, this war. No matter which way you look at it, it's drenched in shame and embarrassing actions on both sides. So now it turns out, so Pig Bodine's hashish cache is buried outside the window that Harry S. Truman is occupying at the Potsdam Conference. And so Slothrop has to figure out a way to get there. Emil Zoro helps him plan it out a bit. And Slothrop, as the chapter opens up, is like, why don't you do this? And Zoro's like, it's not my specialty. This is something for an American superhero. It's not just, not my specialty. And he says, well, why doesn't Pig Bodine do it? oh, Pig's gone. He's gone back to the John E. Badass, and we'll see him turn up in the next episode. No, it's for you. You need to do it. Slothrop's like, he keeps trying to back out of it, but it's tough. Too bad. He has to do it. He agreed, so he has to do it. And so they have a plan, and he has to steal a boat up the river, which goes from Neubabelsberg to Potsdam. And location always matters in Pynchon. Neubabelsberg is the center of the German film industry, and we're going to see this turn up more and more, him weaving in the German film industry as Slothrop eventually meets Greta Erdmann. And then so he goes to the conference, and indeed he gets in. He has a fake passport with his name on it as Max Schlepsig. He keeps shifting identities, but he goes in wearing a cape and the helmet as a superhero, and nobody really bats an eye, which I highly doubt would be the case. And they wonder if he's like a famous movie star, and he says, "Oh, I'm Errol Flynn," and then he starts signing autographs as Errol Flynn, like anyone would buy that. And besides that, what's Errol Flynn doing at the Potsdam conference anyway? Absolutely hysterical. But nobody bothers him, and he gets in, and he finds the Truman's window, finds the hashish, digs it up, and he's standing there with it when a guy looks out the window, whom he thinks is the actor Mickey Rooney. For some... And then there again, what would Mickey Rooney be doing here? I have no idea. And he thinks he catches a glimpse of Churchill through the window. And then as he's coming out, Chicherin grabs him. He turns around, and Chicherin and his men accost him. They grab him and inject him with sodium amytal, the truth serum that we saw him at St. Veronica's injected with in part 1. So now Chicherin's got him. As it turns out, Chicherin will like him quite a bit, and his costume as well. So then episode 8. Now with episode 8, we return back to the Argentine anarchists that Slothrop had connected with in Zurich when he had left Nice after the death of Tantivi Mucker Maffick, and he was depressed, so he left Nice and went to Zurich, and Blodgett Waxwing had set him up with some underground types there, one of which was the guy named Squalidozzi, who was the Argentine anarchist, who gave Slothrop a job running messages between the anarchists, between Zurich and Geneva. And so we're back to this guy, and they had mentioned Pynchon had mentioned that they had hijacked a German U-boat, and that it was off the coast of Africa. So now we're on the U-boat off the coast of Africa, and I think too here there might be an oblique reference, once again, as we saw in yesterday's video with the reference with the hot air balloon to Jules Verne's 5 Weeks in a Balloon. There might be an obscure reference here to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is inspired by Moby Dick, with the submarine going around the world. And it does go through the Mediterranean, as I recall. So there might be a reference to that. So these Italian anarchists are on the boat, and they're talking about various things, and mainly the point of it is that they want to make a movie about the epic, an Argentine epic. I've never read it. Martin Fierro, written by a guy named Hernandez, about the gauchos on the Pampas and so forth. And so they want to turn that into a movie, and they're going to hire none other than Gerhard von Gull. Now, the thing about this novel that you realize as you go through it is everything and everyone is 6 degrees of separation. Everyone is connected somehow to everyone else. So they're going to hire Gerhard von Gull, the director of Alpdrucken, to direct Martin Fierro. And then we come back to a flashback where I think Squalidozzi is in Bavaria, and he meets with von Gull, who believes now, because, remember, the White Visitation had hired him to, as I'm going through this, I'm realizing how incredibly convoluted this novel is, but at least I'm following it, and it's very entertaining. Okay, so he meets with von Gull, and von Gull, who had made the fake Schwarzkommando film for the White Visitation, realizes that the Schwarzkommando now actually turned out to be real, and he has this suspicion that somehow he made them real with his film, and he thinks he can do the same thing for the Argentine anarchists here with Martin Fierro. He's like, I'll make it real. So they're talking with him about that, and meanwhile, the John E. Badass shows up, which we had just seen Pig Bodine going back to, which was his ship. And he has taken now a drug called onirine, and of course oneros means dreaming, so it's a fake drug, but some sort of a amphetamine or painkiller that Laszlo Yempf had invented, and somehow he got it while he was in Berlin, and he's put it in the coffee grounds on board the ship. So everyone is all stoned on this drug, whatever it is. And so the submarine, the Argentines on board the submarine realize, they pick it up on their radar, and they realize that they're shooting torpedoes now at the submarine, but they miss because the hilarious implication is, because they're too stoned on the John E. Badass to get, to get a direct readout on the submarine. Anything with Peg Bodine in it is going to be hysterical. He's one of my favorite Pynchon characters, actually. And then so that's where we'll leave it, and the next chapter returns back to Chicherine's interrogation then of Slothrop, and we'll see what the results of that are.